Matthew, what are you up to? What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I'm your host, John Delray. Yeah, it's week 2 now. We are previewing week 2 of Packers versus Colts, the home opener for the Green Bay Packers at Lambeau Field. So I'm going to talk a lot about who the Colts are and their side of things, while also, of course, giving the injury report and everything else. You know, I started off last week when previewing week 1, talking about how week 1 is always a bit of a mystery because sure, there's new coaches, new personnel, etc. You don't know, you don't have trends to base it on. Well, week 2 is still kind of like that. And with the Colts especially, there just isn't that much background to go on. Because Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, Michael, these are guys who haven't played together a ton. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like looking at an offense with a rookie, except a very, very unique one who has his own style of offense. So I'm going to take you through the injury report because there's news there for sure. So we're going to go through that, take it through who the Colts are, and then also maybe what we can expect a bit on both sides of the ball. So first up, let's hit that injury report. So ultimately for the Packers, yeah, you see a pretty long list of names there. You know, Kenny Clark got elevated to full participation today. Ballantyne stayed limited, but doesn't get a game designation, etc. Cooper's full. But there are 3 questionables here. And 2 of them pretty freaking noteworthy. Marshawn Lloyd, pretty well expected again. Limited. He's been limited all week. Who knows if he's going to go or not, but he got a questionable tag again. But the other 2, they're news. So Jaden Reed, he was good all week. And then all of a sudden, he must have gotten hurt in practice today. Now, Matt LaFleur in his presser didn't exactly divulge a lot of details here, but Jaden Reed wound up logging a limited practice today with a calf/shin injury, and then got a questionable designation. Jordan Love also got a questionable designation. We've been talking all week about how Matt LaFleur has kept the door open, and it was very easy to assume, well, it's just gamesmanship. He doesn't want the Colts to know what to prepare for. But to go as far as actually declaring him questionable does seem to be almost like a new level of gamesmanship that we haven't generally seen from LaFleur, if that is indeed what is going on here. Plus, keep in mind, too, that at his press conference, LaFleur said they generally, he gives at this Friday news conference, he gives the injury report there, talking about who's questionable, etc. Today, he didn't do that. Said that there were still some things to figure out and that the injury report would be out about an hour later. Very not normal for how Green Bay has done things on a Friday. So is it possible that he got a heads up from the medical staff that hey, Jordan's doing a little bit better than we thought. We want to buy some time here. Let's put him through some more tests and then put out your designation because we don't want to rule him out if there's any shot and sweet goodness he could go. And if this is gamesmanship too, I'm going to throw on there that you really can only do that for so long. If you put a questionable tag on him this week, then if you have him out next week, then you basically have to admit that there was a step backwards there. Or he's got to at least start doing a limited practice thing, or everyone's just going to know that you're lying, right? It really kind of loses some luster if you're just going to keep that door open in perpetuity for him to actually start playing. So either, this is a more elaborate level of gamesmanship from LaFleur than we've seen before, or Jordan Love legitimately has a chance to participate in this game, and LaFleur is staying true to his word, saying, we're going to give him every chance to play. The only thing is, whether it's Malik Willis, whether it's Jordan Love, and whether Jaden Reed plays, all 3 of those things greatly impact the game plan that we could expect to see from the Green Bay Packers. So taking a look at this again for the Colts side of things, because they certainly have their own questionables. So Julian Blackmon, their starting safety, he's been DNP all week. He now is officially out. Also, it's not listed there, but another one of their secondary starters was named out after week 1 because he was placed on IR. That would be cornerback Juju Brents. He now is out, just not listed there. But then they've got 3 questionables of their own. One, DeForest Buckner, one of the league's best defensive tackles. He was DNP all week. Now he's questionable with a back injury. If you dive into Colts content, their side of the world, they're all basically pretty optimistic, saying that like Buckner's, he kind of done this before. He's a vet. He doesn't need to practice. There seems to be faith in the Colts side of things that he's going to go. May not be his normal workload, but it looks like he's going to go. Josh Downs got the questionable tag, but elevated to a full practice today. Seems to be indicative of a guy who's going to go. And then their kicker, Matt Gay, he's fine. And then Kwity Paye, their starting defensive end, one of their better pass rushers, certainly. Again, on the Colts side of the world, sounds as though he's pretty 50-50 as to whether he would go. Take it with a grain of salt, because that's just what I was able to find. But on the Colts world, it kind of seems like Buckner may be playing. It seems to be trending that way. Kwity Paye, significantly more of a question mark. And that pairs up with those secondary injuries, which we will definitely be talking more about soon. So who are them Colts? Well, for one, head coach Shane Steichen, he's back in year 2. But then the Eagles, we talked a lot last week about how there are all these new coordinators, different things. Not so with the Colts. Gus Bradley, he's still there, still their defensive coordinator. Jim Bob Cooter, still their offensive coordinator. So continuity there from the coordinator side of things, even rattling down through most of their assistant coaches. The vast majority of these coaches are now in consecutive years for the Colts. One noteworthy name as well that you may recognize, they may have forgotten as a coach, that would be Reggie Wayne, their wide receiver coach. Just want to point that out. So then taking a look at the Colts depth chart, just to give you a flavor here. Anthony Richardson, obviously their starting quarterback. Jonathan Taylor, the former Badger at running back, one of the league's best running backs, of course. Then taking a look at wide receiver. They seemingly now are 4, maybe 5 strong at wide receiver. And yes, that is former Packer Juwan Winfrey there on IR. But Michael Pittman Jr., a guy who's expected to blossom this year. Josh Downs questionable. Alec Pierce had a big game last week. He was their leading receiver. He is a big play receiver. But then they also have rookie Adonai Mitchell, and this deserved some special attention. What this chart is here is basically like targets per route run on the vertical axis. The horizontal axis would be their separation score, how much they were able to separate themselves from the D-back covering them. If you look all the way over on the horizontal axis, you know who got more separation than anyone else last week? Yeah, Adonai Mitchell, their 4th wide receiver on the depth chart. And then the guy who's 5th on the depth chart there, Ashton Dulin, yeah, he had a 50-yard touchdown catch last week. So the Colts have this underrated receiving core. Pittman is a blossoming star. Then you've got Downs and Pierce, 2 younger speed receivers. Mitchell, who looks to be their version of Dontavian Wicks and always getting open. And then Dulin, another big play guy. Certainly an underrated aspect of this Colts team, not to be overlooked. Then you take a look at their offensive line. While it not necessarily is the great mountain of Philadelphia that they went against last week, it's awfully freaking good. Headlined, of course, by Quentin Nelson at left guard, Ryan Kelly at center, etc. It is an experienced group. It is a very good Colts offensive line. Moving on to the defense, it's a good front. Latu last week was amongst the league leaders in pressures in his first game, and he's backing up Kwity Paye officially on the depth chart. Paye, again, 50-50 shot to maybe play. Buckner, we'll have to see about there. I will say, if Buckner is out, that does drop the talent level of this entire Colts front by a bit. Buckner is the anchor that everything in their line works around. Grover Stewart, very competent player as well. So while it's not exactly the best group up front, their up front group is a lot more notable than the back end. Then at terms at linebacker, E.J. Speed, Zaire Franklin, Olabi, Zaire Franklin, certainly the biggest name there. And then you get to their secondary, where again, it is beat up. With Blackman out, it looks as though they're going to be starting Denbo at safety. Probably, I don't want to say probably. It could very well be Rodney Thomas as well. It seems to be some questions about that in Colts world. But still, then you got Nick Cross, who gave up some collisions last week. Kenny Moore is one of the league's still best slot corners, certainly. But he's surrounded now by Dallas Flowers and Jalen Jones on the boundary, who maybe they're just not as good of outside corners. So let's just talk about what we maybe can expect here from each side of the ball. For the Colts offense against the Packers defense, the 2 main components of the Colts offense, we know it's Anthony Richardson Their quarterback, who, while incredibly young, can do it all. He's got a cannon. He can literally throw the ball 70 yards. Oh, and by the way, he's one of the fastest quarterbacks in the league, too. And then they also have Jonathan Taylor at running back. They got Michael Pittman Jr. at wide receiver. But really, the two foundations, I would say, are probably quarterback and running back. But the thing is, those two have barely played together. See, last year, Richardson started a whopping 4 games in his rookie season. He left 2 of those partway through. Eventually, his final game of the year, he left then for good with his season-ending injury. But remember, Jonathan Taylor started last year late because of injury following a contract dispute. And he was only a part-time player in the same game that Richardson barely played because then he left with his season-ending injury. So while these two are the foundation together, they haven't been together very much. So we can look at last week and say, like, okay, what did they do last week? You can make a pretty big argument that the Colts are a very boom or bust offense. Last week against the Texans, yes, they fell 2 points shy of getting the victory. Richardson in total was 9 of 19 for 212 yards through the air, but over half of those yards came on only 2 of those 9 completions. One being 60 yards, the other being 54 yards. And then taking a look at what Richardson did on the ground, because he's a very, very capable running, one of the best running quarterbacks in the league today. He had 56 rushing yards on 6 attempts. But again, 19 of those 56 came on a single run. Meanwhile, looking at some of their other players in the offense, Jonathan Taylor, 16 carries for 48 yards. Okay, like that's fine enough. You'd probably expect a little bit better from Taylor, especially behind the Colts line. And then Michael Pittman, 4 catches, 31 yards. So while Richardson does what Richardson does and got these big plays, it didn't necessarily translate into success for the 2 other biggest stars, if you will, on the Colts offense who had rather meager games. So they piled up 27 points, but so much of it came from big plays that the Texans allowed. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of the Packers offense, granted in a different way, but in the regards of boom or bust. The Packers offense at kind of like the midpoint last year. Remember when we were all really frustrated, but the offense began to click? It just didn't translate to wins yet. Think about like the Chargers game, the Steelers game, that kind of era of the season, right? Where the offense would go 3 drives and do absolutely nothing and then all of a sudden pop off for a 50-yard touchdown. Yeah, that's kind of like the Colts offense. The thing is, though, for the Packers, approaching this from the schematic standpoint of the Packers, I think the Colts would love it if the Packers came out and did a lot of what they did last week. Keep in mind, the Packers were relatively vanilla last week compared to what we were expecting against Philadelphia. They did a lot of contain. They didn't want Jalen Hurts to get out of the pocket against them. They really didn't get much pass rush at all until about the 4th quarter. And it was kind of vanilla, right? And maybe part of that was because of the field, maybe because it was partly week 1. I tend to think it's just because they wanted to contain Hurts. More contain as opposed to disrupt. But the thing is, I think the Colts would really like that if the Packers did that again, and I expect them to go the other way. Because even though Richardson is like Hurts in terms of mobility and having a good line in front of him, I think the thing you want to do here is create disruption against the young quarterback. Line up against these young, speedy receivers. Not because they're not good, but because you ideally want Richardson panicked and having to actually make decisions on the field, not just see open man, hit open man, like we're so used to watching for so long. Giving Richardson time, giving Richardson space feels like a mistake versus how they did it against Hurts. I want chaos and confusion against a young quarterback, even if that means you'll occasionally get burned. And you will. I like Richardson to make his mistakes most when he's under duress. And I will admit, the numbers here do get a little shaky as to whether that backs up or not, because there is one statistical anomaly when looking at this, and that's the fact that Anthony Richardson has yet in his career, granted short, but he's yet in his career to actually throw an interception under pressure. But his completion percentage falls by nearly half when he's under pressure, and his turnover-worthy play rate per PFF actually goes up. Not a ton, but it does go up when under pressure. So I think ultimately the key still is get in there and get pressure. Plus, just from a personnel usage point, get Evan Williams and Edgerrin Cooper on the field. I know Matt LaFleur admitted this week that the reason why Cooper only got 11 snaps this week is because there was an alignment problem and it cost him a touchdown. I understand. Rookie's gonna rook. But he still was one of the most talented players on the field last week for the Packers defensively. It was a very strong showing especially the later snaps following his gaffe in terms of alignment. But also get Evan Williams on the field. The Colts do have above average speed at the wide receiver position with Pierce, Downs, Mitchell. So defensively for the Packers, I think the athletes need to play. I do like Bullard in the slot for this matchup. I like Evan Williams at safety in this matchup and playing that modified big nickel that we saw teased so much in the preseason that then they didn't do for a single snap last week. I know Keyshawn Nixon is your more experienced slot, but I think this is more of a matchup for the youth here. And I just want to say, it's not going to work every game. And I'm not campaigning for this to just be the personnel. But I really think folding in that package this week and using it a lot could be a key to actually throwing off the Colts offense. As for the Packers offense against the Colts defense, it's really hard to say this right now because who's going to play quarterback? Because that may completely alter the game plan. Is Jayden Reed going to play? Because that may completely alter the game plan for the Packers. Regardless of whether it's Love or Willis at quarterback, I think it's worse if Jayden Reed is out, if Malik Willis is your QB. And you may be like, well, yeah, you want your best wide receivers if you got your backup quarterback out there, right? But I think it goes even farther than that. Jayden Reed, your end-around guy, your slot guy, a lot of your quicker possession type stuff guy, would have been more important with Malik Willis at QB, where you need to get the ball out, versus Love, who you can at least trust to get the ball down the field to the other receivers not named Reed. So if Reed can't go and Willis is the QB, I think that's even worse than Reed just not going in general, or more impactful than Reed missing with Love in at quarterback, though. No matter what, though, the Colts secondary is hurting. No Blackman, no Brents. It puts a severe dent into their depth. And Kenny Moore, still one of the best slot corners in the league, like I mentioned earlier. But around him, some severe question marks, like Jalen Jones had a very difficult week 1 against the Texans. Yeah, he racked up 8 tackles, but he also gave up a bunch of catches. 6 catches, over 80 yards, 21 of which came after the catch. Also grading poorly, while not having the stats really with it, at least in terms of coverage, but grading poorly was the other safety opposite Blackman in terms of Nick Cross, who gave up 100% completion rate, granted 2 for 2, when targeted. But where the Colts really struggled last week was against Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon turned in a vintage performance last week, over 150 yards on the ground, over 100 of which came after initial contact. In total, the Colts missed 9 tackles last week, which helped Joe Mixon get to that number, right? It happened to be the same number that the Packers also missed last week, although I'm telling you, I still think PFF was way too low in tracking the Packers' missed tackles. But 9 is no joke, and that's what the Colts had last week against Mixon and the rest of the Texans. And I will say, I think for the Packers, getting Josh Jacobs going is going to be a point of emphasis, no matter who's a quarterback. The problem is, I think it's also a point of emphasis for the Texans' defense. And that's why Jacobs may not be the overall key that so many are assuming. Still important, don't get me wrong. I'm just not blowing this up to be like it's going to be 45 carries for Green Bay or anything silly. According to basically everyone on the Colts beat, if you go find that out, so many of them are talking about how the team is readily admitting that they didn't use these words, but they were afraid of CJ Stroud. They were afraid of the Texans' aerial attack, and they acted like it. And so they sold out, they backed up to stop the pass, and then they let Mixon run all over them, right? This week, they are going to ensure, with Gus Bradley as their defensive coordinator, they're not going to make the same mistake twice. They are going to focus in on Josh Jacobs and not allow another good running game in Green Bay to run over them. Okay, so that would make it tougher to have Jacobs be the one-all, be-all point of emphasis. But in addition to that, the Texans' success on the ground last week came in a different way than the Packers now like to get their success on the ground. Of Mixon's 30 carries, 26 were zone runs. Jacobs in Green Bay, they now utilize a gap scheme, with Jacobs doing almost 2-to-1 gap versus zone runs last week. Pair that with the fact that Buckner is expected to at least play a little and he's their best run defender. See where I'm going with this? No matter who's at quarterback, it just feels like all of these things are aligning for Jacobs to still be successful, but not to the level of Green Bay should only ground and pound, which is what some people out there are calling for. I'm just not sure that it's the best thing that they can do. Factor in a completely banged up Colts secondary, it may be time to air it out a bit. The difference is, if it's Malik Willis at quarterback, then you're looking at a ton of quick stuff. Yeah, he's got an arm. How accurate that arm is, no one in the league really seems to know. But screens, slants, rhythmic, tempo-based. Think Romeo Dobbs time with some of these shorter routes, right? That's the offense you would see with Malik Willis. If it is Jordan Love at quarterback, oh yeah, then run the offense you did more so last week and actually air it out, regardless of reads out there or not. Get it to Watson and Wicks and allow them to beat what is a subpar at this point Colts secondary. So overall, let's look at it this way. Eagles and Colts, right? We're just coming off a game against the Eagles. They got a bunch of similarities. If you almost want to view the Colts like junior Eagles, I would get it. Very mobile quarterback. He's probably more explosive than Hurts. Certainly not as experienced. A great running back who can take over a game if they're allowed to, Saquon to Jonathan Taylor. And a very good offensive line. Granted, Colts not as good as the Eagles, but still very good offensive line. And then very talented wide receivers, but probably not quite as good as the Eagles trio, and certainly younger than the Eagles trio. And then looking at the defensive side of the ball, a really banged up secondary and a good front, assuming health. So if you want to look at the Colts like an off-brand Eagles, I'd get it. I would totally get it. Or an Eagles in development, I would understand that too. The thing is, in my mind, whether it's Malik Willis at quarterback or Jordan Love, this is a winnable game for Green Bay. They will give up some big plays defensively. I don't really care what scheme they run. I don't care. Anthony Richardson will rip off one or two big, be it through the air or on the ground. It's going to be the way it's going to be. But if they can force Richardson into making some mistakes as well, then overall they should be able to contain Indy on the whole, just like Houston did. Offensively, sure, have Josh Jacobs be your driver, but ultimately to have success in this game, you've got to air it out. How, though, could very well be dependent on who is in at quarterback. Is it going to be a lot of bubble screens, slants, etc.? Or is it going to be the offense that we've come to know and love with Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson hopefully beating guys 25 yards away? We just don't know. The Colts and Packers are also finding themselves in some relatively comparable situations right now, both coming off close losses against contenders in their conference. They both are young teams. But this is the home opener for Green Bay. And Green Bay does generally do pretty well in September at Lambeau Field. Something in the air about it, right? So even if it's Willis at quarterback, I have to believe that Green Bay's defense will show up more this week than they did against Philadelphia. And they can put them in a position to take this win. It may not be pretty, but who plays for both teams is going to have a really big effect here. This may be a not pretty game regardless. Like it could be 90% ugly with a few gorgeous plays from both teams. But still, looking at the rosters, it just feels like Green Bay is a more talented team. If Malik Willis is the starter at quarterback, you could argue it the other way, and I get it. But still, the surroundings around the quarterbacks has me feel like Green Bay, if they take advantage at the right time against a very beat-up secondary, regardless if it was a QB, they should at least be able to do enough to get a victory at home. So, with that in mind, it is very tough to guess the score here because who knows? So let's go. Who knows who's going to play? So let's go Green Bay 27, Indianapolis 22. Green Bay moving then to 1-on-1 and just hoping to get by to the next week when maybe Jordan Love will be at full strength or maybe he'll just play at all. So much to be determined with the Green Bay Packers. Thanks so much for joining me here at Lombardi Time Brews. I do hope you're having a fantastic week. I will see you on Sunday for the watch party. Just me for half one, but then Claudia will be joining for half two. But we will be here Sunday for the watch party all game long. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. And as always, go Pack Go.